From Los Angeles, Rethinking Heroes with Cary Harrison.
I've spent a decade taking a bite out of conspiracy theories, unraveling urban legends, and grappling with worldwide top secret issues.
I've even racked up some of their awards.
Wow, first of all, what a question.
Journalism is about telling the truth, all while ferreting out the bottom line.
I'm a Harrison Hellraiser.
With me, Cary Harrison, as your guide.
Rethinking Heroes with Cary Harrison.
Rethinking Heroes, Cary Harrison with you, your new best friend. Welcome. So much fun today. Let me just switch the camera shot. Why? Because, of course, we are live streaming on YouTube. You can simply go to Cary Harrison. Just Google Cary Harrison YouTube, Cary. Cary Harrison YouTube, and you'll be able to watch the guests and see what we're doing today. Very cool stuff. Frustrating as it is with everything going on in the world, it is helpful to break it down and understand the parts that are moving silently behind us. There are so many messages going out right now. None of them are in sync. So today, we're going to do a cool deep dive and explain everything you need to know. There it is. Boom, done in 1 hour. We are going to explore how authoritarian regimes, particularly fascist movements, seek to control our understanding of the past to consolidate their power. If you've read 1984 by the extraordinary George Orwell, you're going to relate to the way the world is operating today. As a former Soviet so aptly put it when acknowledging that the Soviet system never commemorated the Holocaust, she said, to paraphrase, "Once you define and identify one genocide, you can recognize other genocidal crimes. Therefore, you don't recognize any of them at all." And that's kind of where we are today. And I'm not talking about genocide. That's just an example. And it's a perfect launch pad of why authoritarian regimes try to erase history, to prevent us from learning from the past and recognizing the warning signs of oppression. History provides multiple perspectives, allowing us to see the world from different viewpoints. And this is also one of the reasons Rethinking Heroes spends so much time on history and the unpublished moments that have been pivotal in twisting civilizations into the odd pretzels we all circumnavigate in our daily lives. Now, recounting history is a threat to authoritarianism. Yes, people who might be running for president who really don't want you to have the true history. They might want you to have the MAGA history, which is still unwritten, although I am working on a MAGA history of the United States. It makes me pee from laughter. It is just outrageously lampoonable. But they believe this stuff. And authoritarianism, try saying that 10 times fast. It relies on a single mythic narrative to justify its power. By erasing history, authoritarians aim to misrepresent the past as a single story, suppressing dissenting voices and alternative perspectives. But erasing history is impossible. It feels like it's happening, but you know what? You can't really do it. People's lived experiences and legacies cannot be erased. And this is where the possibility of reclaiming lost perspective lies. Like during COVID, when 1 million people died, their family members knew they had died, despite the fact the federal government from the White House was telling them it's fake. It's fake news. It's not really happening. People working in hospitals and piling corpses up in ice cream trucks, they remember. See, fascist ideologies in particular seek to divide populations into us and them. And they do that by exploiting ethnic and racial and religious differences, sexual orientations, whatever. If you're human and you check a box because you're human, you're one of them. They create a mythic past, they use propaganda, and they justify hierarchies of race or religion. Understanding how fascism works is crucial in today's world where authoritarian movements are on the rise. I mean, on the rise. Do you know the American passport was the most powerful in the world for decades? It no longer is. The German passport. Talk about ironies. You can go to more places with a former Nazi passport than you can with an American passport. We're going to get into a little bit why. It is appalling when you think about it. This debate about whether to call these movements fascist or not, it's ongoing, and it's clear that they employ similar tactics and techniques to past fascist movements. Remember, just history repeats itself. How these movements conjure violent mobs. I know I'm speaking in code to you. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Think in the last couple of years, conjuring violent mobs, stacking courts with loyalists, direct hatred against minorities or majorities, as the case might be, and using education to indoctrinate the young, or removing education to indoctrinate the young. Here in the States and around the world, an ideological war is taking place. It's a fight between those who want to preserve hierarchies rooted in arbitrary factors like race and ethnicity and gender, and those who want to upend them. Our schools have become a key battleground in this war. Look at Florida, where if you acknowledge climate change as real on a school campus, you have committed a third-degree felony. Likewise, if you even suggest that gay people are real human beings, like me, you've also committed a third-degree felony. So up yours, by the way. Happily, every major book publisher is now suing the state of Florida and Ron DeSantis for violating the First Amendment after sucking tens of thousands of books out of schools and public libraries. Imagine former to the death adversaries like Penguin and Random House actually joining sides against book bannings. Of course, we all know it's because they have skin in the game, even though a lot of people don't read books on paper anymore. But they still are the ones with the skin in the game. And it's a pity that the people of Florida don't think they have skin in the game. Oh my God, corporations are now rescuing us, all while I'm talking about fascism. The paradoxes are delicious here. Now, you'd have to have literacy to know what literacy or illiteracy is, and that is in fact part of the goal of this kind of fascism and what we're seeing in Florida. Plus, with fascism, people are intimidated and fearful of government repercussions. Your body could be found in the jaws of a random alligator like mine. So don't think that's not impossible. In a moment, we're going to examine the tactics used to control our understanding of the past and the impact on our present and the future. Let's now turn to Yale professor and frequent cable television contributor Jason Stanley, and we're going to drill down on one of the central elements of fascist politics, the need to create a mythical history of purity and righteousness. The Germans did this successfully in World War II and called them Aryans, a completely non-existent, whole-cloth, invented group of humans, which the world believed were real. At least occupied countries, to the point that they wanted to stay alive, said they believed these people were real. Jason Stanley is the author of 6 books, his latest, Erasing History, How Fascists Rewrite the Past to Control the Future. He's a member of the Justice Collaboratory at Yale Law School, serves on the advisory board of the Prison Policy Initiative, and consulted on the January 6th Commission. He writes and speaks frequently about authoritarianism, democracy, propaganda, free speech, and mass incarceration for the New York Times, the Washington Post, MSNBC, CNN, PBS, The Guardian, Project Syndicate, and many, many other media outlets. Jason Stanley, we want to welcome you to Rethinking Heroes.
Great to be in conversation with you.
Was that a long enough encomium for you?
Yes. Very good.
We love our intellectuals. You always get a red carpet here on Rethinking Heroes. You begin your book, Erasing History, by writing that authoritarian regimes often find history profoundly threatening. Why? Under Jim Crow, the history of slave rebellions was suppressed. China suppresses any mention of Tiananmen Square. Florida, where I'm standing at this very moment, makes illegal any mention of Black Lives Matter. So as I stand here right now and say that Black lives do matter, if you do hear a knock on the door and the sheriff comes in, you're going to know why. You're going to know why. Jason Stanley, help us understand.
Well, authoritarianism requires a hierarchy. Hierarchy is the principal structure. You've got the leader on top, Ron DeSantis in your case, and then you have the authoritarian represents himself as speaking for the dominant group. So what you have to do is you have to erase all memory of challenges to hierarchy. You have to erase memory of non-dominant groups challenging the dominant group. So Black liberation movements in the United States. You have to erase the history of social movements challenging our wealth class, like labor history. This sort of this version of authoritarianism, fascism, involves rigid gender hierarchies, praising the traditional family. That's how they get social conservatives to vote for them. So you have to erase the perspectives of LGBT. And then finally, just structurally, democracy requires that all our voices are heard and all our perspectives are part of the conversation, because democracy is about political equality. If you silence large numbers of voices in your country, you just don't have democracy anymore. And that makes people conducive to authoritarianism.
You know, I love ironies and paradoxes. We heard a few earlier. Unintended, they just popped up in the middle of my monologue. When you think about the NSDAP or early Nazi Germany, how it was buoyed by gay people, Ernst Röhm, who ran the brown shirts. I mean, openly gay. Hitler had no problem with that until about 1931. Himmler was a homophobe. So the very people that helped the very bad people suddenly became the very bad people because they got in the way. Their usefulness disappeared. And this whole thing is just complete nonsense. The problem is people get hurt. So I'm wondering if, as you do at Yale, you teach accurate accounts of history. Does this help your students understand and create a firewall between them and any appetites toward fascism? Does knowledge and understanding actually prevent fascism from taking hold?
I mean, you've got knowledgeable fascists who, without a doubt, some of the great intellectuals of the 20th century, like Martin Heidegger or Carl Schmitt, were fascists. But they wanted explicitly to construct a society. An authoritarian society under a Führer, a leader. So they knew what they were doing. Similarly, like look at politicians like Ted Cruz or Tom Cotton or J.D. Vance or Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis is a Yale grad who went to Harvard Law School. Ted Cruz is a Princeton grad who went to Harvard Law School. These are people who know what they're doing. And what they're interested in is power. So it's not like they're not knowledgeable. I mean, Ron DeSantis, and I mean, I went to the State University of New York at Stony Brook and paid my own tuition. These are people, these are terrific students from the world's best universities, and they're interested in power. And so they know what they're doing. Ron DeSantis got a Yale and Harvard education, but the education he wants for the people of Florida is Prager U and Hillsdale College. So you can be a knowledgeable fascist because you can be interested in power.
You know, it's interesting you say that. My grandfather, Phi Beta Kappa, Yale, was a nice guy. He ended up being a civic leader and doing all the good things. Then his son, my father, also a Yaley, was a fascist. Absolutely 100%, was just intoxicated with the idea of clobbering everybody who didn't look like him, didn't live in the same town as him. And so the level of knowledge and the access to that kind of enlightenment, I don't know if it's an amygdala problem, if it's a personality problem, if it's a cultural thing, if it's just capitalism gone amok. But I guess it doesn't matter where you go. The problem is when people really learn the tricks of the trade, they can be even more dangerous.
Power is intoxicating. So democracy, if you go to one of these, it's no accident that all of these people, that so many of those people come from these elite institutions. They're used to being on top. They're used to being the elite. So they don't want a democracy where everyone's voice matters. They're used to these. Ted Cruz was a top student at Princeton. DeSantis, a top student at Yale. They're drinking the Kool-Aid of this kind of elitism. And democracy is a threat for these guys. Loss of status and power.
We're talking to Yale professor Jason Stanley. He's author of 6 books, including his latest, Erasing History: How Fascists Rewrite the Past to Control the Future. And he's laying out how this need to control and distort the telling of history factors into the right-wing attacks on universities, on professors, on other educational institutions, and how it's behind the hysteria around CRT, around book banning and curriculum changes, plus the scrubbing of minority contributions from history. Poof, never happened. He's also a member of the Justice Collaboratory at Yale Law School, serves on the advisory board of the Prison Policy Initiative, consulted on the January 6th Commission, writes and speaks frequently about authoritarianism, democracy, propaganda, free speech, and mass incarceration for the New York Times, Washington Post, MSNBC, CNN, PBS. And we're here right now exploring something. Plus, because we're also acknowledging KPFK and public radio, we have a couple of his new books available for a $120 pledge. Support for KPFK, by the way, comes from Atria, One Signal, an imprint of Simon & Schuster, publishers of Jason Stanley's book, Erasing History: How Fascists Rewrite the Past to Control the Future. And Jason, as people call in at 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735 with a $120 pledge, the first 2 are going to get a hardback copy of your book, an important read, a legacy read. Once you understand that, you could pass that on to generations and teach and reteach all of the research that you've done and the philosophy that is the basis of all human understanding. Let's talk for a second about if Donald Trump were to get reelected in November. What will MAGA and their funders' next steps in reshaping the way history is taught? Let's overlap Project 2025 with this as this new grand eraser of everything we know and have known.
Yeah, so what we can expect and what we've already seen Donald Trump push for is patriotic education rather than democratic education. What does that mean? That means veneration of the United States, removal of critical history that's necessary for self-understanding. This kind of like self-praise and egotistical regard. This is inconsistent with realizing democratic ideals. Living in a democracy means we want to come closer to freedom and equality. It doesn't mean sticking out our chests and feeling that we're the greatest country on earth and our people are greater than anyone else. It's about making our people equal and giving them freedom. We can expect those ideals to be submerged behind a kind of nationalist self-regard. We're seeing we see this all over the world as democracies fall. Instead of education preparing citizens to improve our country, we're going to see education being used to glorify the dominant group, to hide the problems of our past that have consequences for today. In fact, that's illegal. It's illegal to teach about structural racism in many states. It's illegal to teach that, white people, many white people got to inherit their houses from their parents and grandparents, whereas Black American citizens didn't really have that because federal housing loans were unavailable to them. So that history is going to be illegal to teach. And what we're going to get is kind of ultra-nationalist nonsense. We see this in Hungary too right now, when the public schools are being essentially you have ultra nationalists, Hungarian nationalists from the past being resurrected as heroes. We're going to see.
Looks like the video just froze there. We'll give him a second.
I'm back. Oh, no audio? You can't. No one is talking, right? Okay, so what we have is let's see. So what we can expect from the future is a kind of, if Donald Trump wins, is a kind of education that just prepares us for this myth of national greatness. So, and what that does is it supports various fascist myths. It makes in particular the fascist myth of great replacement theory very effective and powerful. Because if the dominant group in our nation is the greatest group in history, then replacing them is going to threaten the nation. Also, one of the principal backgrounds of the principal, as it were, members of the fascist grouping that we see today are Christian nationalists. So we're going to see an education system that destroys the barrier between church and state. So what we're going to see is an education system that claims the United States is a Christian nation. There we are. So this is just the beginnings of the challenges to our education system we face. What we're going to see is a continued authoritarian attack on public school teachers and universities, on the critical teaching of history. And we're going to see what we see in Florida, which is terrified public school teachers and public university professors.
It's quite true, and I appreciate that, Jason. We had a giant interruption with the internet. I think many of our MAGA friends are constantly disrupting, blowing up our websites and such. So whatever we said was, shall we say, irritating to them. So we have been irritated back, but I am back. You are back. And thank you so much for filling in that gap there and talking about what's important. Hungary, I was there a year ago. Viktor Orban, while being sort of the captain of anti-LGBT and whatever, also comes, and you probably talked about this, to the United States. He's a keynote speaker at CPAC. He comes to Florida, visits Ron DeSantis. So a lot of this is Hungarian thinking. Much of this does not originate here. We have federal laws that actually allow certain things, but states can do what they want. Then it can take a couple of years for it to get up there, get challenged, they get sued, and then it has to go away because it's unconstitutional. But it can last long enough to become the new normal. And that's what they're counting on, retraining people. So who cares about the law? If it becomes normal in people's head, it becomes the new way. And then they've actually won, right?
Well, the tendrils of history, the tendrils of one's education last so long in people's mind, and not just in people's minds, but in the national consciousness. This is your point about history repeating itself. So, for example, Reconstruction, the brief period after the Civil War when Black Americans were allowed to vote, it ended after a dozen years, this experiment in democracy in the South. Because a myth arose, a pernicious disinformation campaign, saying that Black voters and Black politicians were corrupt. Well, when Donald Trump complains about a supposedly stolen election, what he says, he blames it on Black majority cities or cities with large Black populations. That resonates with people because it reminds them of the history that they or their parents or grandparents were taught. So those tendrils remain. And on Viktor Orban's influence on politicians like Ron DeSantis.
Oh, they're all the same, really. It's okay.
I was recently in Tennessee, and Justin Jones, the brilliant 28-year-old legislator who had been expelled and then reinstated, alerted me to the fact that the Tennessee state legislature just passed a resolution in honor of the Danube Institute, which is Viktor Orban's think tank. And Justin Jones on the floor of the Tennessee House asked the person presenting it, "Do you know who Viktor Orban is?" And he said, "No." So what is Hungary doing? What are Hungarian institutions and political structures doing writing legislation for the Tennessee state legislature?
Well, it doesn't seem terribly patriotic to me unless you're a patriot of Hungary.
Exactly.
And Vladimir Putin and the rebuilding of the Soviet satellite system. But then that's a whole different show, isn't it? We're talking. Go ahead. I saw a thought percolating there, but I jumped on you there, Professor Jason Stanley, who is Yale professor, author of 6 books, including his latest, Erasing History, How Fascists Rewrite the Past to Control the Future. Let's talk for a second about America's founding being shrouded in these horrible misdeeds and contradictions. Slave nation where all men are created equal, except for the ones that aren't. Manifest destiny that resulted in a Native American slaughter, some 16 million as we're now able to count them. Can authoritarianism still take hold in America if we actually expose and truly reveal these contradictions, or is a third of the country just walking on its knuckles? I know I'm being cruel, but I feel that way today.
Well, if you represent the history of the nation as innocent, then you have a case that critical history is undermining the nation, and this we see everywhere. We see it. We see in Russia, the textbooks now justify the ideology behind the Ukraine war, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, by representing, by completely eliminating Ukrainian history and representing Russia as only ever on the side of independence movements, and they're only ever going into neighboring countries like Georgia and Ukraine in order to rescue the ethnic Russians there and impose impose peace or bring peace. So that kind of what you want to do is you want to make people feel threatened, that the nation is under threat, their families are under threat, and you need a strong leader to defend them. So what you want to do is say the nation is innocent. These people who are talking about the sins of the past are anti-American or anti-Indian. So So then, you get people aligned with this cartoon version of the nation to further your claim that, oh, the Marxists and globalists are trying to smear the nation and thereby to bring it down. When actually what makes a nation great is that it faces its past and overcomes its sins.
Well, I very much appreciate having you on today. I apologize for the technical issues. As you can tell, we are not only the strongest FM west of the Mississippi at 212,000 watts. It's extraordinary, but every chance somebody gets to knock us down, knock us off the air, knock you off the air here as we talk to Yale professor Jason Stanley, they do take that advantage. It disrupts the hell out of me, pisses me off wildly, but makes me double down and want to have you back on another time. I appreciate you very much coming on today. Jason Stanley, author of 6 books, including your latest, Erasing History, How Fascists Rewrite the Past to Control the Future. Thank you so much for joining us today on Rethinking Heroes.
Thank you so much for having me on. Thanks for the work you do.
All right, my friend, we'll talk to you again. Cary Harrison with you. This is Rethinking Heroes. Let's take a moment to nod to KPFK, and you can get the book, Erasing History, How Fascists Rewrite the Past to Control the Future. Sweeper now.
We are in complete control. We are Rethinking Heroes with Cary Harrison. RethinkingHeroes.com.
All right. If you didn't know, support for KPFK comes from Afria One Signal. It's an imprint of Simon & Schuster, publishers of Jason Stanley's book, Erasing History, How Fascists Rewrite the Past to Control the Future. We have 2 books available right now for $120 pledge. That would be the first 2 of you that pledge. You're going to get his book right now. If you call 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735, you heard it here with your own ears or saw it with your own eyes if you were watching the video at RethinkingHeroes.com, RethinkingHeroes.com, where we are live video streaming, of course. You can also go to YouTube, the same thing. Watch it there. You will have seen me get knocked off the air. You will have seen the guest, Jason Stanley from Yale, get knocked off the air exactly as we were talking about fascism and how propaganda is put together and his book. This is what we're now dealing with. This is why we need to support KPFK, the radio portion not knocked off the air, but if it doesn't have the content, you get dead air. It's a win for them. 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. The first 2 to pledge $120 to support KPFK. Talk about a long-term contribution. You throw in that $120, it's going to last years and years and years because people are going to get the podcast, my podcast, of Rethinking Heroes, illegal in the state of Florida, as we just determined, much as would be Jason Stanley's book that we are asking right now for you to enjoy when you call 818-985-KPFK. It is a book that will unveil, which will unfurl the secrets of propaganda, erasing history, how fascists rewrite the past to control the future. By supporting this station, you can hand that book off to your friends, your family, your kids. Read it out loud on the floor of a classroom. Get arrested because it's fun. Have a sheriff be... Oh, Jesus. I know. It's insane that I'm making fun of this, but this is the way it is right now. Like, I don't get knocked off the air that often, but I just did, and so did the guest, separately, not on the same feed, separately. That is extraordinary. That is a first time. That makes me pissed off. And yes, my family did do the naughty things we're talking about. We had 3 plantations, but I went back 10, 15 years ago and apologized to many of the black people with my actual last name for human theft. And we did an NPR story, different from KPFK and this kind of public radio, but we did a network NPR story on this called I'm Sorry. And we, you and me, the listener right now, if we don't stand up and do corrective measures on fascism, on what's going wrong and admit things and fix it, it will only get worse. They, They, whoever they are, they rely and depend on you and I doing nothing. They rely and depend on you and I rolling over. They depend on you and I not knowing what's going on. But you do know what's going on. So pick up the phone right now. Call 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. Make a $120 pledge. Make a pledge of whatever you can. The first two that make a $120 pledge, both of you, plural, are going to get that book by Jason Stanley, Yale professor of philosophy, all about how fascism works and what you can expect if the people next to you do nothing, but you are doing something. 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. Make a donation now. Shh.
We are in complete control. We are
Rethinking Heroes with Cary Harrison. RethinkingHeroes.com.
Don't forget, Cary Harrison with you. This is Rethinking Heroes, RethinkingHeroes.com. You can catch this broadcast live streaming as video on YouTube. Simply Google Cary Harrison YouTube. Boom, up it will come. You could also go to RethinkingHeroes.com, RethinkingHeroes.com. And you're going to catch our live feed right there on the belly button of the page. Coming up, we're going to talk briefly to a furniture executive in honor of Trump vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance. And we're going to find out which are the most lovable love seats for our modern Republican listeners who have a penchant for porking the couch. We're going to learn from this expert. It's serious. We're going to learn from this expert which piece of furniture is the most satisfying. So let's jump to him right now. With us is Glenn Timmons. He's a furniture executive in Fort Myers, Florida, who's agreed to come on and help us appreciate which couches are most popular for sexual release. Now, look, there's no shame in supporting the men of the GOP who ravish lazy boys and love seats. Many such politicians are famous for having a wide stance in airport restrooms or other acts of wanton sexual release while publicly opposing it at the same time. I'm not going to say that's hypocrisy. I'm going to say that's horniness, well satisfied by commercial furniture and or restrooms. I mean, airports are public. Why not make them public for once and for all? Glenn Timmons, I want to welcome you to Rethinking Heroes. And Glenn, you have gone. Well, I guess you got afraid. It was tough getting him to agree to come on and talk about this. We were going to talk about J.D. Vance, who said that despite his writings in his autobiography, Hillbilly Elegy, he says he actually did not violate the sofa. But Florida is filled with its own kind of hillbillies and book banning and pent-up frustration. So we were hoping that Glenn Timmons would explain how he says it's actually a real thing and actually how popular this behavior is, really. So instead of that, we are going to pause again. We're going to play some station promos for just a minute. When we return, we're going to ask the question, should Gen Z vote? We're going to talk to Jason Palmer, former Democratic presidential candidate, and find out what he has in store to change the future for you and me. Well, so much for me saying we're going to a break. I guess we're not. Jason Palmer. Let's go to
Rethinking Heroes with Cary Harrison. RethinkingHeroes.com. Rethinking Heroes with Cary Harrison. RethinkingHeroes.com.
And it is Rethinking Heroes, RethinkingHeroes.com, where we are live streaming video right now. You can catch a copy of this show. Plus, you'll be able to see all of the archives when you sign up for our free newsletter at RethinkingHeroes.com. You'll be getting transcripts of these shows. Plus, you'll be able to see in just a moment our former Democratic presidential candidate who's upcoming. Made headlines. This guy made headlines with his primary victory in American Samoa. It's brave to run for president. It's brave then to create partnerships in over 1,000 schools and 300 colleges. As you know, I just returned from Europe over the summer teaching 10 to 14-year-olds critical thinking and media literacy. Why? Because we need to hand them the baton of media. They need to understand what's real, what's not, what's propaganda, how to research, how to do interviews, and not do just TikTok fun. It is brutal hard work, but it is the younger generation that will be the salvation. This man has figured it out, putting together 1,000 high schools, 300 colleges, leading a national voter registration drive that transcends party lines. He's empowering Gen Z Americans to vote on the issues that they care about, from climate change to reproductive rights. I want to introduce you to Jason Palmer, now leading that charge to activate young voters through his organization called Together, believing that youth vote will decide this year's election. He's on a mission to register 1 million new voters before November by endorsing common sense congressional candidates from both parties. I want to know who those common sense congressional candidates are, but I know they're out there. And you know who they are. All of this focusing on problem solving and reducing polarization. Jason Palmer, we want to welcome you to Rethinking Heroes.
Hey, Cary, thanks for having me on. And I should have you do my intros on every single thing that I do. That was fantastic. And that is what we're all about. We've endorsed 18 candidates for Congress. Their average age is 38 years old, half Democrats, half Republicans, and even 3 independents thrown in the mix who have real possibility of winning. And they are all committed to and have signed a pledge that says that they'll join what's called the Problem Solvers Caucus. When they get into Congress, we need to take Congress back from the crazies, give it to younger people who are more technologically literate, who are more focused on getting things done to solve these big problems across our country. And honestly, I just want to talk about this all the way through November and try to get as many of these people elected as possible.
I'm glad that you're including Republicans, and I'm going to say why, because I just heard people cringing in the studio here. There's nothing wrong with Republicans or being a Republican. There was, when I was a kid, Republicans were generally sort of Episcopalian, and they believed in helping your fellow man, and, not perfect, nobody's perfect, but they weren't like out there trying to stab and blow crap up and have a coup d'etat, maybe in their hearts, but they actually didn't go do it. So there are good people on both sides who are enlightened and realize that everything hangs in the balance. And if America is destroyed, they are also destroyed. And I think that's the beauty of technology, is that people that are younger that use technology, they get it.
100%. And I do want to just add on the back of that, what you were just saying about Republicans. I'm a Democrat. I ran for president as a Democrat. But in the past, sometimes Republican candidates have been better than Democratic candidates. And I have voted for example, I'm in Maryland. I voted for Larry Hogan to be our governor, and he did a great job as governor, governing across the aisle. But, probably on average, about 80% of the time I'll vote for Democrats, 20% of the time I'll vote for Republicans. But I think us common sense people that are mostly in the middle, that want our government to work, that want it to help all people, we don't want to be engaging in these kind of frivolous debates about meaningless topics. We want to be focused on helping everybody get a job, everybody have an opportunity, everybody get to the American dream. And, just excited to talk to you about all these candidates.
Well, I appreciate that. We'll dip into that in just a moment. Just reminding everybody, we're talking to Jason Palmer, a former Democratic presidential candidate who is putting together a plan to register 1 million new voters before the November election. I would tell you that's a difficult task. You know better than me. How we all want to know, how in heck are you going to pull that off?
Well, I will admit it's a very difficult task to get a million more young people registered to vote. A lot of them are already registered, but in past elections, young people have always been hoped to turn out and then they didn't. Now, the difference this time is we're getting a number of athletes to be doing public service campaigns saying register to vote, get out the vote. We're working with athletes on a number of college campuses across the country where you can actually, they want to do this public service. It's not very expensive to get college athletes and people who are stars in high school to do public service announcements. And this is a little bit of our secret sauce, is if someone on your campus is a rock star and an athlete who, everybody knows and is saying you should register to vote. And then here's the link right here, and you can register to vote online. We just released our platform in partnership with a group called vote.org. It integrates with all 50 state databases for voter registration, for asking for an absentee ballot if you want to vote back home, because a lot of college students travel to go to their college. And now this is all totally digital. You could do it on your phone in 2 minutes. We hope that these public service announcements from these athletes all over the country will inspire more and more students to just say, all right, I'll click, I'll register to vote, or I'll have my absentee ballot sent to me. And if all goes well, on November 6th, the big news won't be Biden versus Trump, or in this case, Harris versus Trump, but it'll actually be, how did all these, millions and millions of young people get registered to vote and vote at the last minute?
Well, and your footprint will be all over that. Obviously, by the way, speaking of heroes, I want to acknowledge Steve M. in Ojai and Hussein in Los Angeles. Both have pledged to Rethinking Heroes during this summer pledge drive. Thank you so much. There are not enough words and not enough time to show my appreciation, but really, you make it possible for us to bring on former presidential candidates with this wonderful alchemy of getting 1 million young voters to vote. Now, let me point out why I personally find that very, very important. Over the summer, when I was teaching these kids critical thinking and media literacy, I realized they don't have filters. They're not jaded. They're not cynical yet. When they see climate change, they see climate change. They don't see weird permutations of melting glaciers. They don't see polar bears bored deciding to jump off the glacier in the water. They see climate change. They are the future. In Florida, 16% of the entire state is over 85 and white. That is a slam dunk voting block for Republicans. And young people will vote the right way that makes sense without all of this nonsense of restoring America to the Germany of the 1930s, or, I Love Lucy of the 1950s, when everyone was a communist or a homo. By the way, not a good time for anybody. But it doesn't matter. Young people get it. And you, through technology, you as a younger person yourself, I feel like a grandpa saying that, don't I? We, as younger people, appreciate what the youth can actually do if they feel empowered to participate in the future that they hope to have someday.
100%. In fact, before I ran for president, my background is as an entrepreneur and an impact investor. So I've invested in about 35 young people over the past decade who are starting companies. And these are always mission-driven companies. Like, one of them does education in prisons and jails. Another one helps teach students in middle school how to learn math, does tutoring. A third helps them get financial aid to go to college, or what are called alternative pathways to the middle class. And, these entrepreneurs all eventually told me, I thought I would go into politics, but then I realized I could accomplish a lot more through entrepreneurship. Our political system is so tremendously broken. And that's what caused me to look around and see, are there any young people that are running for office for Congress? And there are entrepreneurs and people who've been in the military and leadership positions that are younger, but they never get noticed. They never get the extra donations that they need because they're early in their career. And I hope by highlighting these people and generating more dollars for their campaigns and more visibility, we can help get a lot more of them elected. And, as an entrepreneur who's had a couple political successes myself, I think I might know how they can use the guerrilla tactics to get on the radar and win those elections.
Oh, I'm too messing. Guerrilla tactics. Love it. You're a former presidential candidate, Jason Palmer. What specific issues do you think are going to drive Gen Z voters, knowing that some of them you mentioned, you will be breaking the law in the Deep South in many states where this show renders into an audiobook and becomes therefore illegal. So just at your own peril, what issues do you think will drive Gen Z voters to the polls this year?
Yeah, there are about 5 issues that are really driving them, and they're not that different than other voters. Although I would say with climate change and gun violence reduction, those are 2 that are high on their list that are not necessarily high for people that are in their 50s, 60s, 70s. But these are very important to young people because they just were in high school and they were doing drills all the time because of active shooter drills. And they care a lot about common sense gun reform. That's a key issue for them. But the number one issue, honestly, is making higher education less expensive and higher ROI so that they can get that first job in their early 20s and actually get to the middle class. Too many of them are ending up in hourly jobs, or they decide not to go to college at all because it's too expensive. We really have to reform the expense of higher education, which is actually one of my backgrounds. I used to work at the Gates Foundation on this. And then we also have to make it easier for them to find what I call new collar jobs. These are jobs that are like the blue collar jobs of 40 years ago, but they're in technology and digital, engagement. So you hear a lot about AI jobs, and there are those. If you can get those, take those jobs. Those are $100,000 or more. But I'm talking more about being someone who does digital marketing for a company or does social media engagement for a brand, or who actually has like tech ops skills and can work on setting up Amazon Web Services or Google Analytics or these tools that every company has to use now. In fact, you use them to promote your show. You know how important they are. And even getting YouTube, like maximizing engagement on YouTube, maximizing as many subscribers as possible. These are skills that a lot of young people have, and they don't realize it could translate into a job, and not just a job, but a whole career where you're making $50,000, $60,000 right away, even before you graduate from college. And then you're at, 6 figures 2 years out.
You mentioned Jason Palmer about spending so much time at school. All true. Doing gun rehearsals as if you will be shot. This is rehearsing for when the shooter 100% does enter the school. Yeah. The parents have skin in the game in this calculus too. So I would think the parents would be keenly interested in what you're doing because they maybe only have one child and they'd probably like to hold on to that one child. So what you're doing is not only touching the Gen Z, but the parents of Gen Z.
100%. In fact, I have to say, please go look at our website at togetherpurple.org. You'll see all 18 candidates that we're recommending in places like Florida, California, Texas, but also the battleground states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, etc. But the largest donors to the organization, and the average donation is just $100 or $200, are almost always parents of kids that are in K-12 or in college and feel like we got to give better opportunity to the young people in this country. That, we're calling them Gen Z, but we also even stray into millennials. And most of our donations come from people who are considered Gen X in the 40 to 55-year-old range, like myself.
Like me too.
Yeah, who say we need to take this country back and we need to give more power to the young people. And, the average age of these candidates is 38 years old. If we get 90% of them elected, that'll bring the average age of Congress way down, and we'll have a lot more innovative, entrepreneurial group of people who are working in Washington for everyone.
Wonderful. Well, I am so sorry we're up against the clock. I would like to have you back on. I'd also like to see if I could reach out to you because this thing I'm doing with the kids, we've got access to a lot of radio stations, and I think there's a great fit of what you're doing, and we can maybe blow this up together in a good way.
Let's blow it up together, literally. Let's do it.
We will. Thank you so much. Jason Palmer, former Democratic presidential candidate. And give us again, once more, your website.
Sure. It's togetherpurple.org because the purple brings together the red and the blue to create a better solution for everyone.
Togetherpurple.org. Thank you so much. Very much appreciate you coming on. We'll be in touch. Cary Harrison with you. This is Rethinking Heroes, rethinkingheroes.com. A last call out for KPFK and a big thank you to listeners of Rethinking Heroes who are supporting this show. I want you to pick up the phone right now, give whatever donation you can, and support what we do here on public radio. You heard us earlier get knocked off the air separately. I got knocked off. The guests got knocked off, not at the same time. There are forces in there that don't want this information out because this election is life and death for them. Project 2025, they've spent tens of millions on this. They mean it to happen. And we need to do what we can to have our voices heard out of the 380 million Americans. So you could pick up the phone right now and call 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. Make the pledge of your choice. Make it $50. Make it $100. Make it $150, knowing it is a legacy investment for the future that you deserve, the future your children deserve, the future your grandchildren deserve. 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735, 818-985 KPFK. Please pick up the phone. Please throw in a few bucks and know that you are supporting a signal that is the strongest west of the Mississippi, pounding all the way down to almost Mexico, all the way east, almost to Las Vegas, and north all the way up almost to San Francisco. It's an extraordinary weapon that we have. The more people that know about it, the sharper its blade. And we must cut through the clutter, the nonsense, and the cloud and the miasma of madness that is happening out there and get out the truth. Prevent truth decay together. Cary Harrison with you, reminding you can get our free newsletter at rethinkingheroes.com. Plus, you'll get a copy and archive of all of our shows together. And I look forward to seeing you next week.
Rethinking Heroes with Cary Harrison. rethinkingheroes.com.